All we've got to do now is to start pumping.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. Welcome to the Fully Inflated Football Podcast. I am your host, Marcus Whitman, and I've been feeling a little bit under the weather this week, I'm going to be honest, but I wanted to get a podcast up, but don't be surprised if this is a much shorter show, but I wanted to get something up here, and it's going to be a fun one. I'm going to go into really deep into this wide receiver class. I'm going to go 30 players deep. I did a top 10 receivers video a couple months ago, and that list has changed slightly, but this is such a great wide receiver class. I really do think we're going to be getting day one impacts in the third and fourth round of this draft, which is really fun. These receiver classes seem to be just getting better and better each year. So that said, if you enjoyed this deep dive into this receiver class and you want to know really my deep thoughts into any position group in this class, I encourage you to check out my Patreon. It's patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy. I'll be reading off this list from my personal comprehensive draft board that is available to you on Patreon. So you can go look 30 deep at the running backs, the quarterbacks, the tight ends, safeties, you name it. Still filling out some of those position groups, but you'll get full analysis and breakdowns on what's looking like going to be about 550, 600 players this year potentially. So crazy deep analysis into this draft there. You'll also get exclusive film breakdowns. Going to be starting in on my 7-round team-specific mock drafts as well. So if you enjoy my draft content here on That Franchise Guy, you will love my Patreon. You'll support the show in the process. I will warn you, it does charge you on the first of the month. Today is the 31st, so if you sign up right now, maybe hold off or let me know and I can shoot you a refund back. But just a heads up on that. And then after we get through this wide receiver class, I am going to pull up the Patreon mailbag, get through the questions for the show. So that is another benefit of Patreon, is you can submit all the questions that we answer on the show. So let's go ahead and get through the top 30 receivers in the 2021 NFL Draft. And I want to update my top 10. So anyone that I did in my top 10 receivers video, I'm not going to analyze here on this podcast. You can just go back and check out that video on the top 10 receivers, because the analysis of these guys hasn't changed all that much. But Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle has actually climbed to number 2, Devontae Smith number 3, Rashad Bateman 4, Rondale Moore has climbed up to number 5, Tylan Wallace is now number 6, Kadarius Toney is 7th, and then Terrace Marshall at 8, Jalen Darden at 9, and then one guy that is creeping into the top 10 now is Dyami Brown, who I will talk about in just a second. So Seth Williams, the receiver out of Auburn, has fallen out of my top 10 after his 40 time was a big number for him, and he didn't quite get up into that low 4.4s like I thought he could. So let's talk about Dyami Brown, who has now climbed into the top 10 receivers for me. And he's a guy that, like, the hype train for Dyami Brown has left the station. And I was tweeting about him back in January. He definitely pops. Like, initially, he was listed in, like, the 20s in this receiver class. And as much as I like the depth in this class, when you're going through, say, Josh Imatorbhebhe or Nico Collins, to give a little spoiler, some of those guys that were around Dyami Brown at the time, it really is not close. You can tell that there is a significant gap between what Dyami Brown is able to do and some of those more 5th, 6th round prospects. Dyami Brown is a legitimate threat and a potential weapon at a high level in the NFL. And he was used as really a deep threat at North Carolina. I think Will Fuller, Marvin Jones, as a guy that was really just running go balls, the occasional comeback, and the slant. Another decent comp for him would be Darius Slayton from the New York Giants. But to me, he shows much more than that. And don't get me wrong, I love what he does as a deep threat. And I don't think we have a real 40 time on him, but it's really not all that important to me. I only estimate him to run a 4.48 40, which is good speed, but he's not so great as a vertical threat because of the speed. He's got the release. He does enough in the short to intermediate game to keep defensive backs honest. He has excellent ball tracking ability. And he's so good with his hands and his arms, and he fights through contact and really just, fighting through those tough catches. in traffic. So he just has such a well-refined vertical skill set, similar to Marvin Jones, who doesn't have 4.3 speed, but he's had a tenure in the NFL being a premier vertical threat because he's so good at getting off the line and winning at the catch point. And that is really what Dyami Brown does so well. And he's not even that thick. He's only 185 pounds, but he's still very good at fighting through that contact. And maybe there's even some room to grow there. But what stood out to me the most about Dyami Brown is the few times that they did have him running, the slants and the curls and the in routes and stuff. He looked really sharp and really quick. And I actually think with that lack of elite speed, if you will, I think an NFL team could actually open up that route tree and you could get one of these day two, premier receivers, guys like Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams. There's a long list of second, third round prospects that have really surprised because of their attention to detail as route runners. And I think Dyami Brown has a chance to be that kind of receiver. So even though he didn't make my initial top 10 receivers video, and now there's guys projecting him in the first round as a top 20 pick, I think that's a slight overreaction, maybe being a little late to the game on him potentially. I still think he's a phenomenal player. In a lot of draft classes, he maybe would sneak into that first round, but not this year. This receiver class is just too loaded. But I am definitely a fan of Dyami Brown, even if I can't at this point say I'm higher on him than most people because the draft community really has woken up on Dyami Brown, but I don't know if the NFL quite has, and maybe he will be there in the third round and be a total steal. So I love me Dyami Brown. He is now in my top 10 list. And then the other guy that I feel like I give off this perception that I'm lower on because he didn't make my top 10 list, and I don't frequently mock him in my what I would do mock drafts in my first or second round. And it's not that I don't like him, it's just a testament to how deep this receiver class is, but that is Elijah Moore. And he is a slot player. Now, I might have to revisit him because he came out and ran a 4.35 40, which might mean he's got more of that vertical ability than initially expected. But I do think he's probably confined to be that slot player, which does have a bit of a ceiling. And to say a guy who's probably a slot receiver is worth a second-round pick speaks volumes about his ability to separate and be that reliable receiver. But he really didn't do a ton at Ole Miss outside of the slot. They peppered him with targets, and he was an outstanding weapon for them, and I do think he can be that in the NFL level. I feel like I'm talking down on Elijah Moore because a lot of people have him as a potential first-round pick and all this stuff. I just don't know if the upside is truly there with him. I don't see him becoming a Tyreek Hill as that undersized speedster. Now, maybe I revisit him and I change my mind on that. But the main reason he falls kind of out of the top 10 is I do think he's very similar as a player to the combination of Rondale Moore, Kadarius Toney, and Jalen Darden as well. And if those three guys, I wouldn't say they're all confined to the slot. I think they all have aspects where they could be vertical players. But if those guys are going to be your sort of slot playmaker types, those three names that I just mentioned, I do think are better ball carriers, more elusive, get more tough yardage than Elijah Moore. But you are splitting hairs. And I don't want to say anything, I feel like I have this negative connotation with Elijah Moore. It's just I kind of have to defend him not as a top 10 receiver. I just prefer Jalen Darden, for example. I think is probably the biggest difference between me and the draft community. But I still do think Elijah Moore is a guy that is likely going to be a second-round pick, is going to start in the slot day one, reliable hands, makes guys miss, runs incredible routes. The 4.35 40 time, I had him estimated at 4.45. I think he's very fast. 4.35 is insanely fast, and some of these 40 times seem a little more reliable than others. So I don't know if I fully buy the 4.35 speed. I didn't necessarily see that on tape, but it's very possible that is in there, which might force me to change my stance on him. But anyway, I'm kind of talking in circles here on Elijah Moore. He's my number 11 receiver. I like him a lot, even if others are potentially a little higher on Elijah Moore than me. Then we've got my number 12 receiver is Monroe St Brown, and I like him. I'm going to be honest. I feel like every draft analyst, they do that. They say, I like this guy, but here's 15 reasons why you shouldn't draft him. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be honest. I relative to how other people talk about Monroe St. Brown, I would say I don't like him. I think he's a very solid receiver. He's getting a lot of respect, getting ranked 12th in this class, but some people have him as a top 10 receiver. Second round is even a little bit too rich for me with Monroe St. Brown. If you go in the second round, it's got to be like late second for me. He's fine route runner. He's fine with the ball in his hands. He does run block his ass off. He's got decent hands. I just don't really see him being a high-impact player at the next level. I think best case you're getting Emmanuel Sanders, which would obviously be well worth a second or third round pick. But I think there's plenty of scenarios where, not to scout the helmet, but I do think it's a pretty decent comp is Marquise Lee out of USC, who's just kind of good at solid at everything, but not really any standout traits. He came out and ran like a 4.5, which some people were surprised at how low that was. I didn't see a ton of speed on tape. He's just a very solid, sound receiver, but I don't really see him becoming some phenomenal receiver at the next level. And frankly, I think there's a chance that he's just a good rotational third or fourth receiver. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, he's a good receiver, and there are aspects of his game that I do like, but I think a lot of people are a lot higher on Monroe St. Brown. Then my number 13 receiver is Amari Rodgers, who's a super fun player. Now, he, just like Elijah Moore and some of those other guys, he is, that we mentioned when we were talking about Elijah Moore, he is a slot receiver. I don't see him being anything more than that, but he separates at a very high level coming out of Clemson. What's very unique about him is he has an outstanding first 2 or 3 steps. When he gets pressed, he might lose that initial jab at the line of scrimmage, but he is so low to the earth and so strong, and he accelerates so well that he actually can beat press from the slot because he just runs through it so well. And that shows up as well in like his first cut. Like, if he's running, say, a corner route, even if the coverage is tight, when he makes that cut, you can see that initial separation. So if he gets with a guy with a quarterback that can execute the timing of some of those routes, it's really going to show up because he just is not someone that gets covered within the first couple steps of a break. He just accelerates better than most receivers in this class and in the NFL, period. And he's a really good, tough guy after the catch as well. You can even line him up at some running back. He is just a versatile slot beast. Really like him. Third round, I think, is the sweet spot for him. And I think he's going to have a 10-year career as a really just serviceable slot receiver. And then number 14 is Seth Williams. He was in that top 10 receiver video. He has fallen into the third round for me. That 40 time is just a little bit disappointing. So you can go check out that top 10 video to see what I said about Seth Williams. And then very similar to Seth Williams is wide receiver 15, Tamorrion Terry out of Florida State. Think MVS in a lot of ways, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, except scratch the drop issues and input some sort of, let's just say, availability concerns. He kind of had it out with the Florida State staff, and he's got a little bit of a red flag aspect from a just kind of character availability standpoint. But as a player, he is lengthy, 6'3", is real 4.4 speed. What did he ran a 4.45, which may be a little bit lower than you would expect, but it shows. Like, he has excellent separation ability at 6'3". If you want a true vertical weapon that can be that number 2 receiver on third round of this draft is probably where he's going to go. Maybe he falls into the 4th round, though. He very much can be that weapon for you. He does, to me, need to be paired with a quarterback that can let it rip and make him a focal point of the deep passing game. But yeah, he's a really fun player. His 2019 tape is much better than 2020. I know Brett Coleman really likes this guy. I'm probably not quite as high on him as Brett is, but I do definitely see the explosiveness and vertical ability, and I think he has a chance to be as good as, like, I'd say, is a slim chance to be maybe like DJ Chark is kind of a decent high upside scenario for Tamorrion Terry, or he could just be Darius Hayward-Bay and just doesn't work out. He does have a little bit more of that boom or bust aspect to him because he just hasn't had a ton of production, but the athleticism is very much real for him. And then my number 16 receiver, someone I haven't talked a whole lot about, but he just was really impressive to me in the Senior Bowl, and he did exactly what he did at the Senior Bowl on tape. And that's Austin Watkins Jr. out of UAB. Similar to Seth Williams, Tamorrion Terry, all these guys have a chance to be starting deep threats. Now, my comparison for Austin Watkins is Gabriel Davis, who kind of burst onto the scene as a deep threat for the Bills last year. And he's got a very similar skill set, but he's very crafty in his deep routes. If you are in an offense that can get him to run some setup double moves, like, corner posts, post corners, that kind of stuff, when he gets to top speed, he actually gets in and out of his breaks really well for a taller receiver. He's 6'3", 205. He's got good speed. I don't have a 40 time for him right now. I have him estimated at about 4.43, 4.44 speed. So I do think he, again, with Seth Williams, Tamorrion Terry, Austin Watkins, these guys are all clustered as third, maybe fourth round picks that I think all three of those guys can be number 2 perimeter players as deep threats. And similar to what I said about Gabriel Davis, be kind of a surprise day one impact for a vertical passing offense. Then number 17 is a player that people are probably wondering why his name hasn't come up yet, and it's Dwayne Eskridge out of Western Michigan. And I guess you could say I'm maybe lower on Eskridge, although I do have him here, 3rd, 4th round grade. I think he's another really fascinating receiver in this deep class. Now, he's similar to Elijah Moore, Jalen Darden, Kadarius Toney a little bit, Rondale Moore. There's just a lot of these, even Amari Rodgers. There's a lot of these 5'9" receivers that you're hoping can, become more than just slot receivers, I would say. And Dwayne Eskridge has as much of a chance, I would say, as Darden and Moore and some of these guys to not just be slot receivers at 5'9", but history does tell us that at that size, it's difficult to step outside and be that guy, especially when you're coming from Western Michigan, lower level of competition. It's going to be a bit of a step up. Now, that's as much as I want to talk down on Dwayne Eskridge because I really like his game. It's just that I'm maybe a step lower on him than a lot of people. But he really has sharp routes. He was uncoverable at the Senior Bowl. But keep in mind, the Senior Bowl is set up for a guy like Dwayne Eskridge to make those corners look foolish in those one-on-ones because he can absolutely shake guys. He has that vertical ability. He's solid with the ball in his hands. But it's that release at his size. He is older, too. He's 24 years old. So he's a guy that played a lot outside at the college level. And I just wonder a little bit of how much that's going to translate to the next level coming from Western Michigan. It's not that I don't think it can happen, is the reason I have a 3rd to a 4th round grade on him, but just maybe a little bit more questions about kind of his role and the way his game's going to translate, being more of that deep vertical threat at the college level, whereas some of these other smaller guys I think project much better as slot guys, something they did a lot more in college. So I do like Dwayne Eskridge. I think if you get him in the 3rd, 4th round, he's got a chance to be a Brandon Cooks, T.Y. Hilton type of vertical threat for your offense. And keep in mind, T.Y. Hilton was a 3rd round pick for the Colts. So it's not a bad comparison. I think he's got a chance to be that guy. But I think there's also some chance that his skill set just doesn't translate as well. Then my 18th receiver is kind of a receiver, kind of a running back. Demetric Felton is a super fun receiver. If you guys paid attention to the Senior Bowl, you probably know who this guy is. If you didn't, you may not have heard of him because he was a running back at UCLA. But I kid you not, he was the best route runner in mobile for the Senior Bowl, and he played running back in college, which is really impressive. It's a testament to the way that he pays attention to the details in practice, and he talked about in an interview that I heard with him about he would stay late after practice, run routes, make sure that he was always available to the coaching staff to go back out and play wide receiver because that's what he was recruited as. That's what he played early on in his career before switching to running back. So he offers just insane positional flexibility. I think he could be a starting slot receiver sooner rather than later, but I also think he offers a ton of value as just a offensive weapon, a guy that creates mismatch problems, and that's a term that gets thrown out a lot. And that can really mean one of two things. Of course, that can mean being, George Kittle, where a linebacker's too slow to cover him and a safety's too small to cover him. Of course, there is actual on-the-field mismatch problems. But keep in mind, when an offense takes the huddle, a defense is going to set their personnel based on who's in the huddle. So when Demetric Felton, if you have him as a running back who's more receiver than running back, and I'm not talking about like Alvin Kamara or, Aaron Jones, who are like good receiving running backs. I'm talking about Demetric Felton. Like, his route running is much better than, like, I don't know if I'd say it's better than Alvin Kamara, but literally his route running as a running back is unbelievable. I was so impressed. But anyway, if you take the huddle and he's a quote-unquote running back, well, then the defense has to be a little more honest, and that creates some of those mismatch problems with the personnel as well. That's a big reason why 2 tight end packages are such a headache for defenses right now, because you got to decide, do you go big or small? Is the run a threat, or is this just a receiver package? So that's another aspect of being a mismatch problem. So I don't know if Demetric Felton is going to be a true receiver, a running back hybrid. I don't know how much it truly matters what you deploy him as, but his ability to just separate quick, whether you're running a whip route, a slant, he can run corner routes. He even won some vertical routes at the combine on like a stop and go. So he just is super impressive as a route runner. I do have him listed as a receiver because I think that's where he's best. As a running back, there's really not much that's impressive about him. I don't know if he'd be a top 15, even 20 player just as a running back. So that's why I list him as a receiver, even if he might be a quote-unquote running back at the next level. And if he is, like, if he ends up being a starter as a quote-unquote running back, if you're in like PPR fantasy leagues, he's going to be a menace because I could see him getting 5-6 catches a week and getting up there to like 100 catches because he's just such a quick, awesome separator. Then my 19th receiver is another slot type, Daz Newsome. Very straightforward slot type. Honestly, not a lot of comments or strong opinions on him. That's what he is. I don't think it's a bold take. I think if you need a starting slot receiver in the 3rd, 4th round, you take him. Think of like Hunter Renfrow coming out of Clemson. Very similar type of evaluation. He's tough with the ball in his hands. He'll come down to some tough catches. Pretty solid route runner, pretty decent athlete. Plug him in the slot. If you need a starting slot receiver, I think you can get it in the 3rd day of the draft in Daz Newsome. I think that's pretty straightforward. Then we get kind of this cluster of really intriguing athletes, 20 through 22. So Anthony Schwartz at 20 out of Auburn. Simi Fakoko out of Stanford. And Tutu Atwell out of Louisville, who just had a very serious plummet on these rankings before I did this recording. So Anthony Schwartz is a very straightforward evaluation. He is an ultimate track star. He was projected to run in the 4.2s, and to nobody's surprise, he did. He's like an Olympic caliber sprinter who basically has, I don't want to say no football acumen, but it's closer to 0 football acumen than it is to 100 football acumen. He doesn't run great routes. He does not get in and out of his breaks very well. He didn't show, I wouldn't say he showed that he has like bad hands. Like if he's open, he'll catch the football, which is a good starting point for a guy that can get open vertically like him. But he's just a total project. He is still young. That's probably the most redeeming quality about him is he's only 20 years old? I know he's a true junior, but I think he's either 20. Okay, his birthday is September 5th, 2000. So, yeah, he doesn't turn 21 until September. So he's super young. And with NFL coaching, there's a chance that he turns into something, but you're probably not getting anything from him in the first year or maybe 2. So he's just a total project. He's fascinating. He's actually a pretty straightforward evaluation. I do think he's probably worth a late 3rd or a 4th round pick just because if it hits, you're looking at a guy that can be that Deshaun Jackson, Will Fuller type of impact on your offense. He doesn't have to have a ton of great traits with the speed he does have. He just needs to probably fill out his body a little bit, refine his route tree a little bit, and show that he doesn't have bad hands, and he can make it as a deep threat. So he's definitely fascinating. A lot of people have their eye on Anthony Schwartz this year to see where he ends up. And then Simi Fakoko is very fascinating. kind of a similar prospect, to be honest, to Chase Claypool coming out last year. And I have a 3rd to a 4th round grade on Simi Fakoko. Shows how deep this class is. We're still talking about 21st receiver in this class as a 3rd to a 4th round pick. But some people might have him even higher in like the 2nd or 3rd round. I do like the Chase Claypool comp. He can play some slot. He can play some outside. Awesome hands. Sneaky speed at 4.5. He's pretty good in and out of his breaks. So he's just a huge, fun player. He had like 22 targets against UCLA. If you can go dial up that game, just really fun tape. So a little bit unproven, but a fascinating player, a true junior coming out that is definitely a high riser late in this draft process. And to me, Simi Fakoko is one of the defining players for how deep this draft class really is. Because usually you're not getting 6'4", 220-pound speedsters like him with great ball skills and, frankly, pretty good route running in and out of his breaks. So, a very fascinating player. I think he's got a chance to be a stunning find in the 3rd round. And then Tutu Atwell at pick 22. And maybe this is a slight overreaction to his pro day. So he ran a reported 4.42. It's not official yet. There's still room for that to come up into the 4.3s. It might help some things. But the biggest problem I had with Tutu Atwell was 5'9". He was listed at 165 at Louisville. And he actually weighed in lighter at 155. Like, if you're at 165 pounds, you got to show me ability to at least beef up or at least weigh in at the same. But 155 pounds in the NFL, you can't not be afraid of that. It's just almost impossible to see him getting off press at the next level. And that ability as a deep threat, to me, what he showed on tape was real 4.3 speed. To not run even in the 4.3s in a year where everyone's getting 4.3s, right? He ran a reported 4.42. So just a really disappointing workout for a player that needed to have a great workout. He still has a chance. He's still very quick. I like his routes. I like his routes better than most people. But it's just very difficult to see a guy that is 155 pounds that doesn't have real 4.3 speed. You can't really see that guy working in the slot because he's so small. He's going to just get lit up. You'd be worried about him fumbling all the time. He's not going to run block. So that kind of takes him out from the slot. And if he doesn't have real speed and he's going to struggle against release, it's just hard to see, like, where is that role. Now, I still think he has 4.3 speed in there. He looks fast as hell on tape, and he's got some quickness. I think he's going to be able to separate, but he's probably evolving into more of this gimmick developmental weapon as opposed to a guy that I had just mocked at the end of the 2nd round of the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't see any chance in hell you take him before the 4th round. So Tutu Atwell has now taken us into the 4th, 5th round grades with our 22nd receiver ranking. Then my 23 receiver is a player that I had no idea who he was, no idea that I was going to like him as much as I did. But it's Dax Milne, who was Zach Wilson's go-to option in the BYU passing game. And it's not a perfect comp, but a lot of the things he did reminded me of Jordy Nelson, which is funny because a lot of people compare Zach Wilson's play style to Aaron Rodgers. And I see a lot of similarities. Dax Milne has an unbelievable chemistry with Zach Wilson. I think the Jets, assuming they take Zach Wilson, should absolutely spend a 4th or a 5th round pick on Dax Milne if it makes sense for them. Even if he's not a starter, he could be phenomenal depth that gives added value to the Jets much more than anywhere else because he's got that chemistry with Zach Wilson. They were actually roommates in college as well. But Aaron Rodgers and Jordy Nelson, they had that sideline control sort of connection. Back shoulders, really back shoulders is what it came down to, but also the ability to throw those accurate balls on the sideline. Dax Milne has great body control, ability to track those things in. He's not a burner. I don't know what his 40 time is. I've got him projected as a 4.53 40. Like, he's really not a phenomenal athlete, and barring a situation where he gets that unbelievable chemistry with the quarterback, he's probably never going to be a high-end starter. But I really like kind of the detail that he showed. He's also a true junior coming out. Maybe he's just coming out knowing that with Zach Wilson gone, he's probably not going to produce a whole lot, so he might as well come out and see if he gets drafted now. But it's not just that. Like, he's got good release, he's got good ball skills, and he's got really nice footwork to run some of those comebacks, those hitches, to keep guys honest enough to be a perimeter receiver. So Dax Milne is just a really fun player. I would love to see him reunited with Zach Wilson for the New York Jets in like the 4th, 5th round. Then our number 24 receiver, Cornell Powell. Clemson had one of the first pro days, and it was super fun to see him come out and just look just yoked. Like, he was just looking like DK Metcalf, basically. Didn't quite run that same 40 time, but he did run a better 40 than a lot of people expected. I had him estimated as a 4.59 40, and he actually came out, he ran 4.53, maybe knock it down a little bit. I still don't think he has like amazing speed, but he certainly has enough speed to make it, especially when he has the quick feet that he has and the ball skills and toughness and run blocking that he has. It's definitely not a perfect comp, but there were aspects of his tape, and certainly at the Senior Bowl, where he showed really nice release and that quick foot speed to run those short to intermediate routes, things like slants, hitches, corner routes. Davante Adams is a very close, like, physical comparison for Cornell Powell. It's 6 foot, 205. Now, I don't think he'll be as good as Davante Adams, and I think he's probably closer to a Zach Pascal, who's a really good receiver for the Colts. But I think he can be a guy that gets half-decent playing time. I don't know if he'll be like a full-time starter or whatever, but I know he'll contribute on special teams. But I do think he can step in. He's 24 years old and provide, at worst, like a reliable, probably, third receiver, but fourth on the depth chart because he's not really a slot guy to be your quote-unquote wide receiver 3. But I think he gives you a day one impact, and if he gets to the next level and really develops the route running to become similar to what we saw from Davante Adams or some of these other mid-round receivers that really work on their craft, I do think he has that kind of work ethic. I think he has a chance to be a good number 2 receiver. So he's just a really interesting player with that strength. It is another testament to his work ethic. He's not the most exciting player, and I originally had him like 35th on my board. But the more I watched him, the more I saw the workout, the Senior Bowl tape, I'm convinced that he's going to be a solid NFL player. And if you're drafting, and by the way, we have evolved now into the 5th to the 6th round to put this in perspective. So, if you're looking for a potential star in the 3rd or 4th round, that's not going to be Cornell Powell. But if you get into the 5th round and you want a surefire contributor who's going to be a badass on special teams, you can put him in for run blocking and has a chance to develop into a quality starting receiver. I just think Cornell Powell's a really solid, safe pick in the later portion of the draft. And then my next guy here is another player that I wasn't aware existed until I got really deep into my receiver scouting. Blake Prohl. So his brother Austin Prohl is in the NFL. I think he's still on the Steelers. But his brother Austin is kind of that prototypical slot white receiver. And when you go to watch Blake, you would think, okay, he's probably just like his brother. But he's not. He's 6 foot, he's 186, and he actually has some speed. And he's actually kind of similar to Dax Milne, where he's a really good route runner. He actually has pretty good ball skills and release. He's coming out as a junior, redshirt junior, so he is, I think, graduated from school, but kind of had shown everything he needed to at ECU. And he was a big part of that ECU offense, and I actually thought his tape was really good. So this is a guy that's really not getting discussed, but I do have him as a 5th to a 6th round pick and someone that I think has a chance to develop into a starting outside separator as kind of a vertical perimeter receiver. So go check out Blake Prohl. I thought his tape was really good. He had excellent hands. Dude caught everything. I don't think he had a drop on let me just read my blurb on Blake Prohl because I want to see if he had. I know his hands were just incredible. So Prohl is a smooth possession receiver and a much different player than his brother Austin, who's much more of a slot type. Blake is a lengthy perimeter receiver with quick feet, speed to stack corners, and nice body control along the sideline. His hands are some of the best in this class with an unbelievable drop rate of just 1% of his targets. So he had 2 drops on 194 targets, which was just awesome, and that's on his career. He is extremely thin and is not a guy who will win a lot of hand fighting or offer much after the catch. though he does a nice job to compensate the physical side of the game by attacking the football in the air before hand fighting is ever necessary. So there was some of that Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen to his game. Those Vikings receivers a couple years ago, they went after the football. They elevated, attacked the football before the D-backs even had a chance to make a play on anything. So that was another really good thing I liked about him. Prohl is a bit of a surprise declaree, but he has the traits and development track to take a shot on him in day 3 to compete for a roster spot. And his combination of speed, quickness, and bloodlines and polish as a receiver give him a shot to become a starter in the league. So he's, I guess, maybe one of my guys. I don't know where other people have Blake Prohl, but I was pleasantly surprised with his game. I think he's got some unique traits in there that we just talked about. So then my number 26 receiver here, Josh Imatorbhebhe, one of the better names in this class. Very similar play to Cornell Powell. Dude, 6'1", 218 pounds. And if you want a Zach Pascal comp in this class, that's probably much more Josh Imatorbhebhe, although Cornell Powell fits the mold as well. But a lot of similar things that I said about Cornell Powell apply to Josh Imatorbhebhe. He's probably never going to be more than a wide receiver 4. He's got a chance to do it. He is built like a Greek god, and he actually came out and ran. He ran a 4.53. I had him projected at 4.54. He had a 47-inch vertical, so he has a chance to be sort of that. Dez Bryant's a stretch, but you get the point. Be that kind of go deep, go elevate, go make tough catches, and he made some awesome catches at Illinois. So, like, he's not just a special teamer and a blocker. So I think he's worth a chance to see if he can develop there. He's a guy that originally went to USC, was a high recruit, didn't work out there, and ended up kind of having a solid final season at Illinois. But this dude is incredibly gifted, physically speaking. He is a hell of a run blocker. I love the Zach Pascal comp, who's carved out a nice career for the Colts and is one of the best, if not the best, run-blocking receivers in the NFL, which has some value, especially as a fourth guy, someone you're not leaning on too much as a receiver and a separator. But really fascinating player. I ended up liking him a lot more than I expected. He was originally projected to be like the 40th or 50th receiver in this class, and I was like, no, he's a draftable player. He's a freak athlete, and he blocks his ass off. And I like his sort of career arc where he was sort of rejected from USC and then showed some development at a new program. So I do like Josh Imatorbhebhe. Fit the 6th-round grade on him. And then Nico Collins out of Michigan. He has been slowly rising up. Now, he's probably one of my not my guys, to be honest, but it's hard to ignore his testing numbers. So he came out, he ran a 4.45, which is awesome at 6'4", 215. But he ran a 4.45. He has 6.79 3-cone, decent shuttle time, but a 37.5-inch vertical, 125-inch broad jump, and 14 bench reps. Like, he is a physical specimen. I don't know if he was a 5-star recruit for Michigan or not, but to me his tape was just a little underwhelming, and he underwhelmed at the Senior Bowl. But I'm starting to buy into this idea that he's not just a typical 6'4" tree. He does have quick feet for his size, so I do think he can separate. But I didn't see the 4.45 speed on tape. I really didn't. I didn't see him stacking a ton of corners. I thought a lot of his best plays were really good contested catches. He's got good hands. I've heard Mike Williams comparisons for Nico Collins. I'm not going to say I couldn't see it happening, and I'm buying into him a little bit. And maybe come draft day, he'll be in that top 15. I just don't find it very likely. He's definitely someone I need to revisit. I actually want to put that little revisit stamp on my draft board on him right now so I don't forget. But yeah, he's an interesting player to say the least. I'm definitely lower on him, but I just want you guys to know a lot of people really like him. And I've said this on like streams and stuff that I could see him being this year's like Terry McLaurin. Every year there's a receiver that I end up not being as high on. Maybe not every year, but I've had a couple of years where a guy, I'm just not as high on him, and a lot of people are high on him. I don't necessarily see it, and then he works out. Nico Collins is probably the guy that I'm flagging to be that guy. Now, I said that about someone last year, and I ended up being right about them not being very good. I can't remember who that was, but just a note, Nico Collins, interesting physical specimen who I didn't think his tape matched the athletic testing numbers, but it is definitely good to know that those athletic testing numbers are in there. Then we got number 28. We got 3 more receivers to talk about here. Now, do keep in mind, guys, I have currently grades on 64 receivers. So we're not even halfway through this thing. If you want to see every receiver in this class, check out my Patreon. It's patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy. But a 5th to 6th round grade here on my 28th receiver, Keyz Johnson out of South Dakota State. Definitely a slot type. He is a guy that's probably never going to be a star. A lot of people like him a lot as a potential starter. But he's a really good route runner. He kind of catches everything, and he's like a solid athlete. He's just like good all-around football player. Could probably be a starting slot receiver. But I just don't think he's ever going to be a true impact player. And in this class, he gets buried a little bit. But I do like his game. A lot of people are really high on Keyz Johnson. He definitely stood out at the Senior Bowl, just a competitor, a guy that made a ton of plays, a lot of tough catches. But some of that came from him not always creating that outstanding separation at the same time. So he's a really good player out of South Dakota State. Other people are higher on him than me. But it doesn't mean I wouldn't draft him or that I don't think he could be a starting slot receiver. Then number 29, Marquez Stevenson, vertical threat out of Houston. He's a pretty straightforward eval. Now, I don't think Houston has had their pro day. I think a 40 time for him is going to be critical, a critical factor on if he gets drafted or not. He has to run somewhere in the low 4.4s because he really is just a vertical threat. And at that level of competition, he was awesome. He ran past everybody. I've got him estimated at 4.39. I think he can hit that mark. But if he ends up in the 4.5s, I don't think he's a draftable player. He's got some drop issues. He doesn't really do a whole lot other than being a vertical threat. But there's a couple of those receivers like that the Eagles took last year that were like 6th round picks, kind of similar for Marquez Stevenson, just worth a chance to see if he can become a starting outside receiver as that true vertical threat. And then our number 30 receiver here, the last guy we're going to talk about is Brennan Eagles. He's a big-bodied tree receiver out of Texas. Now, he had pretty good testing numbers. He did run a 4.55, which is about what I anticipated, but a 6.93 3-cone. The shuttle wasn't very good, but he did have a 36.5-inch vertical and a 125-inch broad jump. So clearly a good athlete, a junior coming out of Texas. Didn't have a ton of production, though, and I do worry that, he's just kind of coasting on the Texas reputation and being this big freak athlete. Probably was like a 4 or 5 star. I thought he would have benefited from going back to school. But definitely someone worth a shot to see if his best football is ahead of him. If he's a guy that was just kind of going through the motions, trying to get to the pros, and then he's really going to hit that pedal to the metal. So a 5th to a 7th round grade on Brennan Eagles out of Texas. So there are my top 30 receivers in this class. After you get past him, I've got, 4 more players with true draftable grades, and then we get into the potential priority free agent guys. But like I said, if you enjoyed this breakdown, my draft content, check out my Patreon. It's patreon.com/ThatFranchiseGuy. I'm going to take a quick break, polish up my voice a little bit, and then when we come back, we're going to get into the Patreon mailbag. Alrighty then, let's go ahead and get into the Patreon mailbag. We got, looks like about 25 questions, so here we go. Potentially some stuff that'll be redundant here, but here we go from Stuart McAdams. Now that Blake Martinez is playing as a replacement level starter, who do you think was the worst starter in the NFL last season? I've always said Andrew Sendejo last year for the Cleveland Browns was absolutely miserable for them, and they have done a great job to make sure that does not happen again because he was really brutal. Okay, from Ashbro, just a few Broncos questions. Since they signed Kyle Fuller, should they trade up and go after Fields or Lance, or should they stay where they're at, draft Micah Parsons? They're going to have to compete with the Panthers, so it just kind of, I do think that they would be very smart to do that, to go and try and get either Fields or Lance. It'll probably be Lance, but it gets tricky because the Falcons probably aren't trading with the Panthers, so you might be able to move up and get to 4, but that number 8 pick, the Panthers are going to be coming up. So it's going to be very competitive to move up for Lance. I think if the Falcons are willing to trade the pick, that's probably their best bet. But I definitely think that the Broncos would be smart to basically get an extra dart throw at that quarterback position, because Drew Lock, it's just not looking very optimistic, and they have such a good roster that they just got to get that quarterback figured out. And then you also say, or trade down and get Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Yeah, I mean, the thing with trading down for the Broncos is their roster is so good that more picks is only going to do so much for you. But I think Parsons or JOK would be great picks for them if they don't get a quarterback. I just mocked them Parsons because they didn't get Trey Lance. And then you got to think about Mac Jones too. I had a tough time deciding if I wanted to take Mac Jones for them. From Michael White, who are some players in this upcoming draft that I'm uniquely low on? Well, we did some of those receivers that we just talked about, but I would say like Alex Leatherwood comes to mind. Jason Owe is a player I'm lower on. I'd say like Andre Cisco, the Syracuse safety, a lot of people like. I'm not too high on him. Those are just a couple names that come to my mind. Those are some of my not my guys at this point in time. Oh, geez, this is a tough question. I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer this one. What are the top 10 non-QB busts from 2000 to now? Yeah, I don't think I can do top 10 from 2000 to now. I would need to do like research to answer that question. WG, I'm sorry to shoot down your question, but that's maybe a little bit too much to come up with on the fly here. Then from Spencer, so the 2018 class had seemingly 5 good QB prospects for the first round. Was the prelude in the draft community to have teams trade up into the top 10 like this year, or is this year just that good? I think it was pretty common to similar to have people trade up for quarterbacks. I mean, when you have a class like this, you're going to want to come up for these quarterbacks. Now, I don't know if Lamar as a prospect was considered like a top 10 guy, but if you think about it, I mean, let's just not include Mac Jones, who I'm not convinced is a top 10 pick, and you don't see a lot of people trading up for Mac Jones in the top 10. The Jets traded up for Darnold, the Bills traded up for Allen, and the Cardinals traded up for Josh Rosen. So I think it's pretty similar. Now, you can debate Lamar as a prospect versus Mac Jones as a prospect. That's kind of splitting hairs here. But I think when you get a class like this, it's pretty much consensus agreed on that you should come up for these guys. All right, from Ethan, if Watson were to get traded to the Dolphins for this year's first rounder, do I see them taking a QB with the number 3 pick? Well, this is an outdated question. I don't think Watson's getting traded this year. That's my opinion on that. I didn't think he was going to get traded before all these allegations, but I think everyone's kind of making plans. I think Miami trading out of that number 3 spot probably put the nail in the coffin on any Watson trade this year. So I'll just answer it with that. From Loomer Cooper, do you think there are QBs in the draft that would not do well in their system? Do I think there are QBs in the draft that would not do well in their system? Rather, it's the average O-line receiver core. I'm not sure I understand your question, my friend. I think I'm gonna have to skip your question there, Loomer. Nicholas Craig, what is the number 1 trait of a quarterback that makes them a potential NFL quarterback? There's so many things that you can win with at quarterback. But of my 9 QB traits, I'm just going to rank them quickly off the top of my head. I think you need a good combination of all these things. I don't think if you have just one trait, you're going to make it. But I would say just kind of off the top of my head, processor, arm strength, impact accuracy, pocket sense, quick accuracy, decision making, play extension, then off-platform accuracy, and that wasn't including athleticism. I don't know. There's so many ways to be great at quarterback, but I think you need some combination of arm strength, processing ability, and accuracy are probably the big three. From Luke Olander, are there any differences in my scouting process for I already kind of answered that question on the last podcast for FCS D2 and D3 players. So, Luke, I would go check out the last podcast. I did a Spotify-only mailbag question show on Spotify, iTunes, all that. So, I did answer it back then. From Josh Alstrom, why don't the Broncos trade for Gardner Minshew? I feel like it's a no-brainer. Yeah, we've talked about Gardner Minshew before. I don't get why the league doesn't value Gardner Minshew. I think he's shown that he can be a starting caliber quarterback. I don't really get the holdup there. He's a decent complement to Drew Lock in that Lock has all these traits. He's kind of boom or bust, whereas Minshew, I don't think he'll ever be a great quarterback, but he could keep your season afloat and make you a playoff team. So definitely, I'm with you on that. I don't know why the league doesn't value Gardner Minshew too much. From Yoki Keekley, if you would be a defensive coordinator, what kind of defense would I play, and who would it be most like? Really depends on my personnel, to be honest. Like, I do really like right now that sort of Brandon Staley defense from a coverage perspective. It's similar to what the Chiefs run. It's similar to what the Saints run. A lot of cover 4, zone match. You want quick corners. And you're going to run a lot of too high. Don't give up a lot of big plays. As far as my defensive front, it would be very multiple. It would be very hybrid. But it would kind of depend on who my personnel was up front. You know, if I have Myles Garrett, I want a 4-3 front. Whereas if I have Von Miller, I want a 3-4 front. I would kind of carve my front around my personnel there. But from a coverage perspective, I'd run a lot of cover zone match right now, I think is the go-to defense for me. From Greg Grom, how have players deemed as injury risk played out in the NFL after being drafted? Would you say more often than not they work out, or are NFL teams justified in passing on these kinds of players? I'd say it's about 50-50. When guys fall on draft day, it happened to me with Blake Cashman, who has not been able to stay healthy. When guys fall on draft day, you get the casual fan, not even the casual fans, just all of the fans. It's probably not even the casual fans. It's the guys that are diehard film watchers, and they're like, this guy's incredible. How is he a 5th-round pick? Well, we as fans and outsiders don't have those medical reports. Those are real things. And like Jalen Phillips is an amazing edge rusher, for example. He might fall into the 2nd, 3rd round because he could be a concussion away from never playing again. I'd say it's about 50-50 with these guys. Maybe a little bit less than 50-50, but you know, I do think that these teams do a lot of research, and there is something to be said about guys, the 3 or 4 guys a year that have very concerning medical checks. The one I would say that like I'd be less paranoid about is the guy that had an ACL injury and isn't going to be ready to play early on. Like, if it's just one big injury and his availability is going to get pushed back, like Jeffrey Simmons, for example, that was one thing where I was like, that's kind of stupid. Like, he's going to recover from that ACL. He's going to be just fine. Yeah, you're going to miss him for a few weeks or a few months, but you're not drafting just for that first year. Like, he was an incredible football player, and he fell to, like, the 20th pick? That's a lot different than a guy that has, like, recurring hamstring issues. From Daniel Jopp, I feel like fans were quick to criticize Howie for the Miami trade. Do you see Parsons being a main priority as they can develop him along with potential 3-rounders next year? I think Parsons is one of the players that they were comfortable getting at 12. I talked about it in my mock draft for the Eagles. I thought it was a great move. You now have 3 first-rounders to go up and get a quarterback next year. Jalen Hurts probably isn't going to work out. If he does, that's great. But if he doesn't, you're probably not winning a ton of games. You're probably going to have a high pick, and you have some extra firsts now to move up potentially for 2nd or 3rd pick next year if you want. So I think that makes a ton of sense. You're probably going to get I don't think you get Chase or Pitts, but you're probably going to get a chance at Parsons or Patrick Surtain or Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle. And those 4 players are awesome options. I would say before Miami traded out of the 3rd pick, they probably weren't going to get Jamar Chase anyway, because I think the Dolphins would go Sewell and the Bengals would go with Chase. Yeah, you'd probably get Pitts in that scenario. Maybe the Falcons take Pitts. So I just think it was a really good move for Philadelphia. I know Eagles fans were all mad about it because they wanted one of those blue chip players, but I don't think you were even guaranteed to get one of those 3 top guys with that 6th pick anyway. From Bryce Chapman, I know you get a lot of questions like this, but with all of this movement for QBs, do you think there's any chance Jordan Love gets traded? I don't think so. I don't think the Packers have any interest in trading Jordan Love. I think they might be smart to take calls about him, but I don't think so. How would I feel about the Bucks? This is from Keegan. Bucks making a trade for Sam Darnold. Yeah, that'd be a great move for them. I mean, he could sit for... The only problem is his contract is up. So the idea of him sitting and developing for 2 or 3 years, because I think Tom Brady's going to play for at least 2 more years. So you'd have to figure out the contract situation. So that definitely gets a little murky. But I like the idea of him learning behind Tom Brady for sure. From Patrick Hill, who are some coordinators you see being sneaky candidates for head coach positions next year? Good question. I could see Todd Bowles, defense coordinator for the Bucs, getting another chance. I think the Jets' hire of Mike LaFleur is another answer that comes to mind there, being a sneaky option. I was thinking Pep Hamilton was up and coming, but what do you go take a quarterback job for the Texans? It's probably not going to happen. Speaking of the Texans, maybe Tim Kelly, if he has a good year for the offense coordinator there, maybe they promote him over David Culley. There's a few names. From Vic, when you were watching the Kyles of Florida, did I notice their left tackle? He's like 6'9". I don't think I've evaled him yet, but is that, what's his name? Stone Forsythe. I did see that Brandon Thorne, he's like the Twitter O-line expert. I think he likes Stone Forsythe, so I'm excited to get into that eval for sure. From Anthony Bordano, what should the Giants do on the offensive line? Do I still believe in Thomas? I do still believe in Thomas. I did see they signed Zach Fulton at right guard. Fine. I mean, he's a good Band-Aid to have. I just drafted them Rashawn Slater, though, in my last mock draft. I think if Micah Parsons is gone, that's a good pick for them. If you want to check out that mock, see a little deeper dive into that. From Geometric Heat, I saw Nico Collins ran a 4.43. I don't know what you don't see in him. I don't think there's anything stopping him from being Mike Williams. Well, I just dove into Nico Collins, so that answers that question. From Hunt, do you think Burrow pushing so hard for the Bengals to draft Chase could potentially sway the front office to take him over Penei Sewell? Potentially. I mean, either one, they'll be fine. Either way they go. There's tackle depth and receiver depth, so you could just, whatever one you take in the first round, you just go the other way in the second. But to me, Penei Sewell is what they need. You can slide Jonah Williams back to right tackle. He played that at Alabama. But, you want to keep your quarterback healthy, and if the O-line's bad, and it's because they didn't take Sewell because of Joe Burrow, I guess he's got no one else to blame but himself. I could see it happening, but I think they'll take Sewell. From Chris Hain, who is more obnoxious to deal with? Putting me in a tough spot here. Packer fans who think they have a Super Bowl caliber front office, or Dolphin fans who thinks that Tua's 6-3 record as a starter is impressive, and he's just one wide receiver away from being an elite QB. Greetings from Germany. That puts me in a tough spot. I don't know. I get having faith in your team, whether it's the front office or the quarterback. I don't think either of them are obnoxious to deal with. Like, I get it. You have that fandom. I would say probably the Packers fans who trust their front office, because they've shown 10 years of negligence from that point of view, whereas, Tua was a rookie, and if you want to have faith, that's probably more reasonable than having faith in the Packers front office at this point. From Joe Woods, do you see a possibility of Deshaun Watson retiring for 4 years until his contract is up? Man, I'm just kind of staying away from Deshaun Watson questions at this point. It's such a mess. I don't know as much. I don't know. I know as much as you guys asking these questions know about the Deshaun Watson situation. All I know is that before all the allegations, the Texans didn't want to trade him. That's all I know. From Marshall Snyder, I have a tough time separating Slater and Darrisaw. Could you break down their differences and why I have Slater slightly above Darrisaw? So Darrisaw is the better, physical specimen. He's more the prototype tackle. He's got the size. But Slater, to me, had way more polish, just his overall kick slide quickness, his hand usage, his ability to kind of prepare for counters. Darrisaw played in an offense that was so collegey. They got rid of the ball so quick that it's almost like Andrew Thomas last year, where there was a limited amount of true passing sets to evaluate with Darrisaw, whereas Slater, coming out of the Big Ten, much more traditional. So from a technique standpoint, I like Slater much more than Darrisaw. Now, keep in mind, I like both these guys a lot, but Slater is a much different physical specimen. He's only 6'3", 305. He's going to be moved a little bit easier than a guy like Darrisaw, but at the same time, Slater has a great anchor, and he is really built. It's not that he's not a typical 305-pound, 6'3" tackle. He really is a rock. He does not get moved much, though at that size, you're going to have questions. Whether it's a guy catching him from the side where he doesn't have his full balance underneath him, or just in general, you're going to have some questions about the weight and all that. But I just think he's a more well-rounded player, more experience. Not even more experience, just more technique, more polished. Whereas Darrisaw, I have some more questions about that. From Eric Halverson, this is our last question. What's your food and drink of choice for game day? Personally, you're a Modelo and wings kind of guy. I would go with Keyz takeout. Raising Cane's chicken would be my go-to meal. And then I like a rum and Coke, or there's a local brewery. You guys have probably seen me wear my Castle Danger hat up from Duluth. Castle Danger Cream Ale is my go-to leisurely beer. But that is a fun question to end the show with. I'm sorry if I sounded kind of droggy for this show, but I'm glad I got through it. I'm glad I was able to get something up for you guys. Nap time for me, but I hope you enjoyed the show. Do check out my Patreon if you want to submit questions and get all the draft breakdowns and all that stuff. I appreciate you listening. Appreciate you watching. I'm planning on getting my top 10 running backs video up on Friday, so that'll be fun. I also think I'm going to be doing another stream. I just started a Maryland Terrapin Dynasty on my Twitch, so head over to twitch.tv/ThatFranchiseGuy to check that out later tonight. And it was a fun show. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you later.